Hey, good morning. All right, so I want to begin today with I'm going to tell you a true story. It happened back in 1982. Guy by the name of Stephen Callahan. He survived 76 days on a life raft in the Atlantic Ocean. So this is an actual picture of him when he was rescued, both him and that's the raft that he survived in. He was an experienced sailor. He had already crossed the Atlantic, and now he was on his way back. And on the way back, there came a kind of a radical storm, and in that storm, a whale struck his boat, and it put a hole in the hull of the boat. So his boat started taking on water. He had enough time to get the raft out, inflate it, and then go back on the boat and grab some, provisions, a little food and water, and a little emergency kit, some maps, a small spear gun, and a solar still. So he thought he had enough for about 18 days, but because of his skill and his will to survive, this man lasted 76 days in the open ocean before he was rescued. That's crazy. I thought about it. I go crazy when I'm 2 days without my favorite pillow. Right? This guy. My wife knows I ain't joking. So 2.5 months in this little raft. He stayed alive after he went through his food, the little resources of food he had because he had the spear gun, so he was able to eat raw fish. And then he had that solar still that kind of captures what you call condensation, and it filters out the salt so you can drink the water. And he was able to survive. He ended up writing a book, a best-selling book called Adrift, 76 Days Lost at Sea. And a big reason he was able to survive was his navigational skills. He constructed a navigational device. It's called a sextant, and it uses these 3 pencils, and it's got 2 fixed points each day and each night that he uses to navigate. It's the sun and the horizon line by day, and then by night it's the North Star and the horizon. And by using that and pinpointing that, he was able to decipher location and get himself into the currents that would eventually push him to the Caribbean, where he was rescued. It was radical. So really, and this is the point, it was his understanding of those 2 fixed realities in the universe. The sun and the horizon by day, and the North Star and the horizon by night. Incorporating those and reading those, he was able to survive until he was rescued. So that's what I want to talk about today. Everybody, you got 3 pencils in front. No, you don't. We're not going to do that. That's beyond my understanding. I want to show you 2 fixed realities about all of our existence. Everyone in this room. These are 2 fixed realities, spiritual realities. And if we understand them, it will help you navigate through the different seasons of life. So here's the first reality. If you're taking notes, you can always download our app. We've got the notes there. You can write them down however you want. Here's the first fill-in. This is the first reality for all of us. There is a tendency in us to resist the leadership of God in our life. That is called sin. There's a tendency in us, every one of us, to resist the leadership of God. We're God's creation, and we are hardwired to know Him, to walk with Him, to know His love, to walk with God through life, to use our gifts, to use our talents for His purposes and His glory, to share the story of forgiveness, of reconciliation, the restoration of all things. That's what we're called to do. But there's a tendency in our lives to resist Him, right? To run from Him, to do things our way. And really, at first glance, you think about that, that really doesn't make sense, because what we're doing is we run from the author and the giver of life in order to try to find life. But it's our tendency to do that. And when we run from God's ways and we run from God's will, that's what's called sin. Sin is anything less really than God's best, choosing to do life on my terms, my way. I'm the king. I get to do things the way I want to do it, and we resist that. It's called sin. We run and we resist the leadership of God. Not all the time, but there's this proclivity in us to do that, to say, I'm fine, I got this, me. Anybody understand what I'm talking about? Come on, every one of us. We have that tendency. Here's the other rule. Here's the other law. There is a tendency in God to chase after us and interrupt our self-destructive behavior. That's called grace. God loves us. So even though we resist, we run away from God, we run away from his purposes, he chases after us, not with judgment, not with a lecture ready for us, but with love. Not with condemnation. God chases after us with mercy. Our God, hear me, is a God who pursues. He is pursuing us always. He loves us when we don't love him. He forgives us when we are undeserving. This is the nature of who God is, that he has this tendency, he has this way about him where when we run, he's pursuing us. These are two universal truths in our existence: sin and grace, running and chasing. This is our relationship with God. And these are the two central themes of the story we're going to be looking at for the next 4 weeks. And it comes from it's only 4 chapters in the Old Testament. It's a little book, and it's called Jonah. Anybody ever heard of Jonah? So we're going to be looking at this for the next 4 weeks, looking at his story, what he went through, and I guarantee you're going to see similarities in your own life. I know I do. So the first thing we see when we begin to read the story of Jonah, we're bringing Jonah out of the children's room, we're bringing it into the main auditorium. First thing we see is this. Write this down. God calls. Everybody say, God calls. God calls. Now remember who I said Jonah was. He was a prophet of God. Jonah was a prophet of God. That means God would speak to him and give him instructions to tell God's people. Sometimes even a king, like we talked about a couple weeks ago with Nathan, who spoke to David. So Jonah was this prophet of God. However, this particular instruction God gives Jonah took Jonah by surprise. Didn't like it, as a matter of fact. Jonah 1, verse 1 and 2. It says, the Lord gave this message to Jonah, the son of Amittai. He said, get up and go to the great city of Nineveh. Announce my judgment against it, because I have seen how wicked its people are. All right, now stay with me here. See, Jonah was a Hebrew. He was from Israel. And God was telling him, I want you to go to Nineveh. Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrian Empire, which were Israel's hostile enemies. And in fact, Assyria was an empire. They're really, if you do your research on it, they're the first terrorists. They were brutal. Their emperors were brutal. Their kings were brutal. And they were completely opposite from what Israel believed. And so Jonah, this prophet of God, is being told by God, saying, I want you to go and tell these people that they're going to be punished in the name of your God. So this is crazy. It's like, go to your enemy and say, hey, my God, who they don't believe in, is going to judge the wickedness in your land. And Jonah is saying, nah, this ain't going to go good for me, And we're going to read about it in the next couple of weeks. This might go well for them, and I don't like that it might go well for them. This is like you being a Dodgers fan. Any of them in the house? And going up to the San Francisco and telling the Giants that God is going to destroy their season in the name of your Los Angeles Dodgers God. Right? They're looking at you like crazy, right? Some of you saying, sign me up for that. I'll do that. This is what Jonah is faced. He says, you want me to do what? No, it's crazy, at least in the natural. Here's what I want you to know, though. You're going to see it throughout this story, so just buckle up. for the next 4 weeks. You're going to see it throughout this story, and you're going to see it throughout the Bible. As you familiarize yourself with the scripture, you're going to see it in life if you look at what God does. So often, the miraculous, the wow God stuff that he does, you know how it begins? With crazy. That's how God does so much of what he does, is he starts it out with something that's crazy. That's crazy, God. You think about just some of the examples in the Bible, like when God told Abraham, who was going to be the father of all of the Israel nation, Abraham and Sarah, his wife, they're 100 years old. God says you're going to have a baby. Why you got to start off with crazy all the time? Do you know what I'm saying? He says to Moses, you're going to go in and you're going to go to Egypt. Oh yeah, where you're an exiled criminal, wanted for murder. You're going to go there and you're going to be the guy, even though you're afraid to speak, who's going to lead my millions of people out of captivity into their promised land. And I'm going to perform signs and wonders to give you credibility. You wonder why Moses said, do you have a second choice, right? Because it's crazy. Hey, Joshua, you're going to take the army and you're going to march around Jericho. You're going to march around Jericho, and you're going to do it for 7 days in a row. And on the seventh day, you're going to do it 7 times, and you're going to blow the trumpets, and all the walls of the city are going to come tumbling down inside and crush everybody, and that's how you're going to get your victory. Crazy. Don't you think God just wants to see if you'll actually obey sometimes? Like, I'm going to tell you, Jesus says, yeah, give me those loaves of bread, a few loaves of bread, a few fish. Let's feed 7,000 people. Peter, come on, walk on water. On and on, on and on. And I've known this in my own life, and I've watched it in the lives of others, and I see it in scriptures. So often what ends up in the miraculous and powerful in just showcasing the wonder and the strength of God, it begins with something crazy. And that's how it began with Jonah. Here's the point. Oh, catch this, guys. God sees a story and is fashioning a story that is way beyond what we can see. All we see or hear is his instruction to us now. We don't see how this will lead to this and this to this, and then we look back and say, oh, that makes sense now. All we see right now is this sounds crazy. But God sees something that we can't. And God was inviting Jonah into a bigger part of a mission. God had a purpose for sending Jonah to Nineveh that was beyond Jonah's comprehension. God does the same thing with us. God calls you and I to be a part of his mission. You and I. To share his love, to share his grace, to share the story of reconciliation wherever we live, where we work, and where we play. He calls us to do that with your neighbors. They need you to live your life on mission. Your coworkers really need you to be living your life on mission. That doesn't mean you're preaching in the workplace, but that means you're living missionally. You know that you're a part of a bigger story than just your life. That's what God is inviting you into. Your place of work needs that. Your gym needs that. Your kids need that. Your spouse needs that. For people of God to live their lives on mission. God wants you to love and share your story, and yet he moves some of you. Some of you know what I'm talking about. You feel that nudge, and then you're thinking, I can't. Invite them over for dinner, or let them know I'm praying for them. We think, they're going to think I'm crazy, or they're going to think I'm this. That's how God moves. He's already working behind the scenes in ways and setting things up in ways that you can't see. All he's asking for you to do is not figure everything out. You're finite. He's saying, will you obey even when what you think I'm telling you to do seems crazy? Will you obey? So God calls, and Jonah, instead of trusting God, instead of saying yes to God, Jonah does this. Jonah runs. Jonah runs. He tries to get as far away from God as possible when God asks him to do this. It says, Jonah, chapter 1, verse 3, it says, but Jonah got up and went in the opposite direction to get away from the Lord. He went down to the port of Joppa, where he found a ship leaving for Tarshish. He bought a ticket and went on board, hoping to escape from the Lord by sailing to Tarshish. So God said, arise and go, and Jonah arose and fled. Total opposite direction. I mean, 180 degrees different. He went. Before we judge Jonah, though, let's admit we know this play all too well in our own lives, don't we? We know the same thing. God calls us to do something, but because we want to be in control, because we want to be the king of our own life, we run away from God and what he's called us to do. We start following Jesus. We say yes to him. We love that he's forgiven us, but then we see that he's calling us to forgive others. He's calling us to forgive somebody that's really hurt us. And we want to have the right to have our bitterness towards what? And so we run the other way. We start following Jesus, and then we understand that Jesus calls us to sexual purity. Well, that's too hard. That's crazy. And so we run the opposite direction into promiscuity or porn or whatever else. God calls us and we start going, but then all of a sudden we feel like what he's calling me to is a little too crazy. That's too deep. That's too much of a level. I ain't getting fanatical. And then we because you don't camp out in mediocrity. You're either growing or you're going, right? You're either moving forward or you're moving back. It's just that, and again, I'm not in judgment. You know how many times I've done this in my life? But it is what it is. These are laws. These are things that we do. We have a tendency to run from him. We call this sin, right? And here's the crazy thing. This is what has stunned me. And I see it in my own life, the stupidity of it, and I've seen it in your life too. Sorry. But it's just, it is what it is. It's just, we go, God, the giver of life, right? He says the thief has come to steal, kill, and destroy. I've come to give you life and life more abundantly. So he wants to bring abundant life to us. Right? And you think of your best days in your personal life, it's when you are right with yourself, you're right with God, when you're walking and you're awake, you're alert, you're cognizant of God, you're doing what you should be doing, and it feels good. There's no drug that brings you that. But we run, because we have a tendency, we tend to run from the giver and the author of life, and we go in pursuit of these other things that have, promises on them, and we get them to only find out they don't satisfy us. We're left still wanting, but then we keep doing it again and again and again. Who's crazy? We keep running back to things we know don't satisfy us, and God's over here saying, I'm the giver of life. Why? Because we have this proclivity to do that. We have to recognize that in our lives. Been throughout the history of humanity. Jeremiah, another prophet, said this. I love this verse because it nails me. It says, my people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and they have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. They have forsaken. Can you hear the heart of a father who wants to be with his kids, who sees their hearts longing after things? And he says, you have forsaken me, the giver of living water, and you have tried to have your own cisterns, but they don't hold the water. And you keep going back to them. You keep throwing that bucket down that same well. It doesn't satisfy. Quit doing that. Come to me. That's when he cried out, come to me. I've got this. But we have this tendency to run away from God. It's been our story. So what does God do with people like that run from him? He doesn't do what we do, like, well, good luck, See you when you're all busted up. What does he do? He comes after us. He cannot not but pursue you. So write that down. God pursues. God calls, Jonah runs, God pursues. God doesn't abandon us. He doesn't write us off or give up on us. He pursues us. He chases us down with mercy. He chases us down with love. Look what happened to Jonah. Jonah 1:4. It says, but the Lord hurled a powerful wind over the sea, causing a violent storm that threatened to break the ship apart. Remember what we said earlier. There's a tendency of God to chase us and interrupt our self-destructive ways. That's what he does. Sometimes in his love and mercy, God sends a storm your way. Not to hurt you, but to help you, to interrupt self-destructive ways. When we are going in a way that is not working, or worse than that, you're going in a way that's not only hurting yourself, it's hurting those closest to you, God will often rock your boat. He wants to get your attention. He'll send a storm to get your attention to try and stop you from going down that road that's going to bring more and more of that destructive stuff. How many of you can attest to this? You've watched. You look back on your life and say, I've been in those storms. And I see he was trying to get my attention. Jonah's storm wasn't punishment. We're going to see that in just a moment. It was a rescue. It was a rescue effort to try to keep him from self-destructive ways. That's what God does. The author of the book of Hebrews in the New Testament said this. In fact, read this out loud with me. You ready? Let's read it out loud. Here we go. For the Lord disciplines those he loves, and he corrects each one he takes as his own. That's what he does. That's what good parenting is all about too. Is you see the destructive patterns and you correct those things. It's not punishment, it's correction, it's discipline to get them to know right. Because why? You want the best for them. Right? That's what it is. All right, back to the story. Let's keep reading. Verse 5. They're on the boat, storm's coming. It says, fearing for their lives, the desperate sailors shouted to their gods for help and threw the cargo overboard to lighten the ship. But all this time, Jonah was sound asleep down in the hold. It's so funny. There's a storm. Jonah's asleep in the bottom of the boat. There's fear and chaos going on the deck. The sailors are praying to a God gods that really are nothing and can do nothing. And the one person who actually has a relationship with the one true God is asleep. I was thinking about this week. I was thinking this is the story of our world right now. We have a world right now where there's a whole lot of fear. There's a whole lot of chaos in our country. People are looking to things to satisfy, to fill the gap, whether it's drugs or alcohol or a form of government or self-success. None of it works. The storms keep coming. They're raging. There's more hostility than I can remember in my lifetime. Anger, resentment, fear, judgment, intolerance, all kinds of stuff. It's raging. It's raging. People don't know what to hold on to. And so many churches and so many Christians, I'm just being honest, are either hiding in the shadows or they're asleep. And they can't hear the cries of humanity that's saying, is there an answer? And Christians are like in the shadows. Or they're asleep and it's like, Lord, wake us up to what's going on in our world today. Today is not the day to be silent. It's also not, that doesn't mean it's a license to be rude or to be, stupid and shouting at people or preaching at people. That's not it. But it is a day to speak up. It's a day to say, hey. And this is what these guys are doing. This is what happens here. Look at verse 6. So the captain went down. The captain goes down after him and he says, how can you sleep at a time like this? Gosh, there's the prophet. Right? He's saying to Mark, he's saying to any of us, how can you sleep at a time like this? He says, how can you sleep at a time like this? He shouted, get up and pray to your God. Maybe he will pay attention to us and spare our lives. Think about it. This pagan captain tells the prophet that he should be praying and calling on his God. I think this is a little ironic for Jonah. Because the only reason Jonah was on the ship was to escape God. And now the people who don't even believe in God are telling him to pray to his God. Can you see God behind the scenes? So at this point, it becomes obvious that Jonah wakes up a little bit. He's like, what have I done? He knows he's made some bad choice. To tell you, that's a holy day. It's like the prodigal in the pig pen when it says he came to himself. This ain't right. I don't know how I got here, but this ain't right. Jonah, he's asleep, he's crashing, he's fearing for his life. He's like, what more do I need to tell me? It ain't okay. You're about at divorce court, your kid's running away, this going on, you got an addiction you can't stop. Hey, at some point you go, something ain't right here. That's a holy moment when you just wake up. You haven't even done anything yet. But you just wake up and say, there's something about this scenario right now. It's not okay. I got to quit lying to myself. I got to quit running. And that's what happened with Jonah right here. he made a different move. So look at what he does. He acknowledges his sin when he realizes his mistakes. He doesn't lie. He doesn't cover it up. He doesn't hide it. He owns it. He's honest about it. Look at this. They said to one another, verse 7, "Come, let us cast lots, that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us." So it's really like a dice thing, like, who did this thing wrong. So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. And they said to him, "Tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What's your occupation? Where do you come from? What's your country? What people are you?" And he said to them, "I'm a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, "What is this that you have done?" For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord because he told them. So Jonah admits who he is, and he begins to own up to his present reality, what he has done. And this leads to the last part of the story, the one we're going to close with today. God calls, Jonah runs, God pursues, and Jonah surrenders. Jonah surrenders. This is what I'm hoping happens in our lives. What do we do when we realize that we've been on the run? When we come to our senses and we get it. Nobody has to tell us anymore. I've messed up. I've been running from God. I can see the proof is in the pudding. I can see the results. I am not where I ought to be. Do what Jonah did. He was honest. He stopped hiding. He stopped running. Look at how Jonah did this. It says in verse 11, "And since the storm was getting worse all the time, they asked him, 'What should we do to you to stop this storm?' 'Throw me into the sea,' Jonah said, 'and it'll become calm again. I know that this terrible storm is all my fault.'" That is extreme ownership. Don't mistake it. It's not Jonah giving up. It's Jonah giving in. Giving in to the will of God. Jonah stops running. He's willing to sacrifice himself in order to save others. He's willing at this time to be fully surrendered. "I'm sorry, God. I'm going to stop running." Remember, Jonah referred to God as the God who made the sea. And so he told them, "Hurl me into the sea. I am surrendering to the God who made this sea. I know where I've come. This thing is going to stop the moment I surrender." And after some resistance from these guys to throw this prophet into the sea, they finally did. And now, there's one more verse in this chapter. What happens when Jonah is thrown in the sea? You come back next week, I'm going to tell you. No, I'm kidding. It tells us when Jonah was thrown overboard, and this is probably the most famous part of the Jonah story, and it's definitely the most crazy part of the Jonah story. Jonah 1 verse 17, "Now the Lord had arranged for a great fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was inside the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. I told you. God specializes in crazy. Not meaningless crazy. It's purposeful crazy. Do I have a problem with man being swallowed in a fish and staying alive there for 3 days? Heck yeah, I got a problem with that. My brain don't wrap around that. Do I have a problem with that it actually could happen? Nope. God is God. God is God. Why a fish? I don't know. It doesn't say it's a whale. Might be. I don't know. But I know that if God would have sent like a, bunch of driftwood Jonah's way, probably would have just been chalked up as coincidence. But you get swallowed up by a fish, you know that somehow God's involved in this rescue mission. This just doesn't happen. Do you know what I'm saying? Because that's what the fish was. There was a rescue. It wasn't a punishment. Next week, I want to look a little bit of why I think this part of the story is credible as we look at chapter 2. But the story of Jonah, it's not a story about a great fish. It's a story about God's mercy. It's a story about God's grace. It's a story about how this guy, like so many of us, when God is calling us, I want to use you. I want you to be a part of a story that's bigger than you. Come on, bigger than you. And you might be nervous about that. You might not know what all that means, but will you trust me, God? Will you trust me? And a lot of times, instead of trusting, what do? We run. Here's the beautiful thing. He comes after us. And again, he's gentle. He doesn't come after with a 2x4. He's not coming after screaming or wait till I get. He comes with mercy. He pursues you because he loves you that much. Have you ever chased somebody down because you love them and you see where they're going is only going to kill them? And you're like, come, I love you too much to just let you go. That's God. And so at some point, we can turn and say, okay, I'm going to stop running. In fact, I'm going to ask the band to come back up. We're going to close with the song this morning. And as they do, and we prepare to worship, I want us to all just kind of consider just a few questions. Would you do that right now? Just between you and God, where you're at right now. Just a few questions of application. Number one, here's the question. Where in my life am I running? Because we all run. So where in your life are you running from God and you're not trusting his ways or his will? I want you to identify it. You're running from it. Own it. You can stop running today. You can turn to God. God is a half turn away. Identify, where am I running? I know he's calling me to this, but I'm saying no. Here's the next one. Do I believe that God is pursuing me? Do you believe that? You're important. Do you know that God's mercy and his grace are chasing you down? Some of you are here today, maybe just one of you, I don't know, but somebody's here today because God's been chasing after you. He's been coming after you. And he can't make you stop. You can keep running, or you can say, why am I running from the lover of my soul? Makes no sense. The one who wants to make things right. He's coming after you, not with judgment. He's coming after you with love. And here's the last one. Will I surrender? Will today be a day of surrender? Will I choose to trust God? Will I choose to say, yes, you be Lord of my life. Not my will, but yours be done. Not my way, God, your way. That's what he's calling us to. I'm going to ask us to pray right now. Let's pray. I want to pray with you and for you today. Would you bow your heads with me? We all identify in some way with the story of Jonah, and that we have this tendency to run from God, chase after other things that we think are going to do it, right? We all do. It's part of the human condition. But you also have choice. Every one of us has a choice, and you can choose to stop running today. And you can make a turn and say, God, I surrender. God, I want to know your ways for me. I want to try that path out. And so if that's you today, you're like, I need to stop running, Mark, and I need to make a half turn to God. It's for a reason I'm here this morning and heard this. I think God's trying to speak to my heart. Would you just acknowledge that? Every head's bowed, every eye's closed, but I want you to acknowledge that. It's a point of action. Just put your hand up and then put it back down. Just say, that's me. Good. Bunch of us. Yeah. Good. Lord, thank you for that. Thank you for that courage to acknowledge. Father, I pray for them and all of us, Lord, that you would help us, Lord. Help us to have the courage to face you and then the courage to receive this love that's coming after us. You are for us. A lot of us known life without you. What is life with you, surrendered to you like? As you pursue us and you chase us down and you go through everything to get our attention, to bring us back home to you. It's awesome. Thank you for your relentless pursuit after us, God. We just don't want to make it that much harder by continuing to run. We want to turn to you. Would you stand with me this morning? We're going to worship the Lord right now. God, we love you. Help us now surrender to you. We ask it in Jesus' name. Listen, I just believe, I truly do. This morning I was praying about this. I believe that God's going to meet somebody or many of us here just over the next few minutes. Just open your heart, open your mind to God in his pursuit after you. Let this be a moment before we leave here and go about all of our business, a moment where we give God opportunity to do what he wants to do in our lives. So let's worship the Lord.